March 17, 1999. Scene shot Sui, Hong Kong. The neon lights of Nathan Road cast an otherworldly glow through the grimy windows of the third-floor flat. Officer Chen Wei-ning stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the large Hello Kitty mermaid doll propped against the far wall. Something about it seemed wrong. The stuffing appeared dense and uneven, and there was a faint, sickly sweet odor emanating from its direction. He had been here following up on a seemingly routine missing persons case. 3 teenage girls had come to the police station earlier that day, telling a bizarre story about a woman's head being stored inside a giant Hello Kitty doll. At first, the officers had dismissed it as a teenage prank or urban legend. But something about the girls' demeanor, their wide-eyed terror and insistence, had prompted Chan to investigate. Now, standing in this dimly lit apartment thick with cigarette smoke and the lingering traces of methamphetamine production, Chan felt his professional detachment beginning to crack. 20 years on the force hadn't prepared him for what he was about to discover. "Sir," called one of the forensics officers from across the room, "you need to see this." Chen crossed the cluttered space, stepping over discarded takeout containers and drug paraphernalia. The forensics officer was carefully examining the Hello Kitty doll with gloved hands. "There's definitely something inside," the officer said quietly. "And based on the decomposition odor, I think those girls might have been telling the truth." Chen took a deep breath and gave the nod. "Open it up." What they found inside would haunt Hong Kong's collective consciousness for years to come. Wrapped in plastic and preserved with ice packs was the head of a young woman, her features still recognizable despite the obvious signs of trauma. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in an eternal expression of terror. This discovery would unlock one of Hong Kong's most notorious criminal cases, a twisted tale of abuse, drugs, torture, and murder that would come to be known as the Hello Kitty murder. 23-year-old Fan Man-yee had not had an easy life. Born into poverty in 1976, she was abandoned at a young age and grew up in a children's home. The institutional setting did little to nurture her emotional development, and by her teenage years, she had fallen in with Hong Kong's street culture. At 14, she began working as a nightclub hostess, serving drinks and entertaining men for money. It was a common enough story in Hong Kong's underbelly, young girls from broken homes trying to survive in a city that could be brutally unforgiving to its most vulnerable citizens. By her early 20s, Fen had developed a drug habit, primarily methamphetamine. The drugs helped her cope with the demanding nature of hostess work and dulled the pain of her circumstances. But they also led her into increasingly dangerous situations and connections with the criminal underworld. In 1997, she met Chen Man-lok, a 34-year-old nightclub owner and drug dealer who operated out of the Kowloon district. Chen was known for his volatile temper and involvement in various criminal enterprises. He took an immediate interest in Fan, but their relationship would prove catastrophic. The trouble began when Fan allegedly stole 20,000 Hong Kong dollars, approximately 2,500 United States dollars, from Chan's wallet during one of their encounters. Whether this actually occurred or was simply Chan's paranoid suspicion remains unclear. What is certain is that Chan's response would set in motion a horrific chain of events. Rather than report the theft to police or simply cut ties with Fan, Chen decided to force her to work off the debt through prostitution. He and his associates Leung Xing-cho, 27, and Leung Wailan, 21, effectively imprisoned Fan in their third-floor apartment, where they ran a small-scale drug operation. What began as forced prostitution would evolve into something far more sinister. The apartment at 31 Granville Road was a place of nightmares. Located above a bustling electronics shop in the heart of Shin-Shui, it seemed ordinary enough from the outside. But inside, behind multiple locks and a reinforced door, unspeakable acts of cruelty were taking place. Fan Man-yee and his associates turned their makeshift drug den into a torture chamber. For over a month, they subjected Fan Man-yee to escalating levels of physical and psychological abuse. The trio would later claim they were teaching her a lesson about theft, but their actions went far beyond any conceivable notion of punishment. They began by beating her regularly, using their fists and various objects found around the apartment. When that failed to satisfy their sadistic urges, they expanded their methods. They burned her with cigarettes and melted plastic, leaving hundreds of scars across her body. They forced her to drink water mixed with human waste. They deprived her of sleep and proper food, keeping her in a constant state of physical and mental distress. Perhaps most disturbing was the casual nature of their cruelty. The three men would torture Fan while smoking cigarettes and watching television, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. They would take breaks to order takeout food or play mahjong, then return to their victim with fresh energy for inflicting pain. A fourth individual was present during much of this ordeal, a 14-year-old girl who would later become a key witness. She was Chan's girlfriend at the time, despite their significant age difference. Known only as Ah Fong in court documents to protect her identity, she would later provide crucial testimony about the events that took place in that apartment. Ah Fong's presence added another layer of horror to the situation. She was not just a witness, but sometimes a participant in the abuse, later claiming she was coerced by Chen and afraid of becoming a victim herself if she refused. She described how the men would sometimes make a game of the torture, awarding points for particularly creative acts of cruelty. The apartment became a closed system of depravity, with its own twisted internal logic. The outside world continued to buzz by on the streets below, completely unaware of the atrocities taking place just a few floors up. By early April 1999, Fan Man-yee's body and spirit were reaching their limits. The constant abuse had taken a severe toll, and she was becoming increasingly unresponsive to her tormentors' actions. This should have been a warning sign, but it only seemed to anger Fan Man-yee and his accomplices further. One particularly brutal session proved to be the final straw. After being beaten unconscious, Fan never regained consciousness. The exact cause of death would later be difficult to determine due to what happened next, but the sustained trauma and abuse had finally claimed her life. Rather than face the consequences of their actions, the trio made a decision that would add another layer of horror to their crimes. They decided to dispose of Fan's body in a way that would make identification impossible. Over several days, they dismembered her body in the bathroom of the apartment. They boiled parts of her body to remove the flesh from the bones, using the kitchen as a makeshift butcher shop. The process was methodical and time-consuming, showing a level of planning that made their actions even more chilling. The trio kept Fan's head, storing it inside the now infamous Hello Kitty mermaid doll after treating it with ice packs to slow decomposition. Some of her internal organs were stored in plastic bags and hidden in the apartment. The rest of her remains were disposed of in various garbage bins throughout the Shot Sui district. During this entire process, they continued their regular drug-dealing operations. Customers would come and go from the apartment, completely unaware of what had taken place there or what was hidden behind the closed bathroom door. The teenage witness, Ah Fong, later described the surreal atmosphere during this period. The men would take breaks from their grisly work to watch television or play video games. They ordered fast food and discussed mundane topics while Fan's remains were being processed in the next room. The normality they attempted to maintain only emphasized the psychopathic nature of their actions. The trio might have gotten away with their crimes if not for the psychological toll it took on young Ah Fong. The teenager began having recurring nightmares about Fan Man-yee. She would see Fan's face in her dreams, her eyes wide and accusing. The Hello Kitty doll, sitting innocuously in the corner of the apartment, became an object of terror for her. Unable to bear the weight of her knowledge alone, Ah Fong eventually confided in two of her friends. At first, they didn't believe her story. It seemed too horrific to be true. But her obvious distress and the detailed nature of her account convinced them that something terrible had indeed happened in that apartment. The three girls debated what to do with this information. They were afraid of Fan Man-yee and his associates, knowing full well what they were capable of, but the secret was too heavy to carry. On March 17, 1999, they made their way to the Shot-Sui police station. Their story seemed fantastic, almost unbelievable. A woman tortured to death, her head stored inside a Hello Kitty doll, her body dismembered and boiled. It sounded like something from a horror movie rather than real life. But the detailed nature of their account, particularly Ah Fong's insider knowledge, convinced the police to investigate. This led to Officer Chan's discovery of the Hello Kitty doll and its grisly contents. The police moved quickly after that. Fan Man-yee and his two accomplices were arrested within hours. The apartment was cordoned off as a crime scene, and forensics teams began the painstaking process of collecting evidence. The media descended on the case immediately. The combination of organized crime, drugs, torture, and the incongruously cute Hello Kitty doll created a perfect storm of public interest. The case would dominate Hong Kong's newspapers for months to come. The police investigation revealed the full extent of the horror that had taken place in the Granville Road apartment. Forensics teams found traces of blood throughout the flat, particularly in the bathroom where the dismemberment had taken place. They discovered tools that had been used in the process, including knives and various household implements that had been repurposed for torture. The apartment itself became a study in the banality of evil. It was relatively ordinary, a typical Hong Kong flat with 3 rooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom. The furniture was cheap and worn. Empty beer cans and food containers were scattered about. Only the blood traces and implements of torture hinted at its dark history. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation was recovering Fan's remains. While her head had been preserved in the Hello Kitty doll, most of her body had been disposed of in various locations around Shot-Sui. The police conducted extensive searches of the area's garbage collection sites, but many of her remains were never found. The investigators also had to piece together the timeline of events. Through interviews with witnesses and careful examination of evidence, they established that Fan had been held captive and tortured for approximately a month before her death. The role of the teenage witness, Ah Fong, proved crucial to the case. Despite her own participation in some of the abuse, she was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her detailed accounts of what had taken place in the apartment would prove invaluable in securing convictions. As the investigation progressed, a clearer picture emerged of the 3 main perpetrators. Each had their own story, though none could fully explain or justify their actions. Fan Man-yee, the ringleader, had a history of violence and drug-related crimes. Born into a working-class family, he had risen through the ranks of Hong Kong's criminal underworld through a combination of cunning and brutality. He showed little remorse during questioning, maintaining that Fan's death was accidental and that the subsequent dismemberment was merely a panic response. Lung Xing-cho came from a more privileged background. His family had money, and he had received a decent education. However, drug addiction had led him into Chan's orbit, and he had gradually been drawn into increasingly criminal behavior. During questioning, he attempted to minimize his role in the torture and murder, claiming he had merely followed Chan's orders out of fear. Lung Weilan was the youngest of the 3 adult perpetrators. He had dropped out of school early and fallen into the drug trade as a teenager. He seemed the most affected by the crimes during questioning. breaking down several times as he described what had happened in the apartment. The psychological evaluations of the three men revealed different personalities, but similar patterns of antisocial behavior and lack of empathy. None showed genuine remorse for their actions, though all attempted to deflect responsibility to varying degrees. The trial began in November 1999, drawing massive media attention. The courtroom was packed each day with journalists and members of the public, all eager to hear the details of what had become known as the Hello Kitty murder. The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by forensic evidence and Ah Fong's testimony. They painted a picture of sustained, sadistic torture that went far beyond any reasonable response to alleged theft. The dismemberment and disposal of Fan's body were presented as evidence of premeditation and consciousness of guilt. The defense attorneys attempted various strategies. Chan's lawyer argued that Fan's death was accidental and that the dismemberment was a panic response rather than premeditated action. Loon Xing-cho's attorney emphasized his client's lesser role and attempted to portray him as being under Chan's influence. Loon Weilan's defense focused on his youth and claimed he had been manipulated by the older man. The testimony of Ah Fong proved particularly compelling. Despite her young age, she provided clear and consistent accounts of what she had witnessed. Her descriptions of the casual cruelty displayed by the perpetrators shocked even the most hardened courtroom veterans. The trial lasted several months, during which time Hong Kong was gripped by the details emerging from the courtroom. The case seemed to touch on many of society's deepest fears and fascinations: organized crime, drugs, youth corruption, and the capacity for human cruelty. In December 2000, after lengthy deliberations, the jury reached their verdict. Unable to determine the exact cause of Fan's death due to the disposal of her body, they could not convict the three men of murder. Instead, they were found guilty of manslaughter. Chen Man-lok, Loon Xing-cho, and Loon Weilan were each sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge described their actions as showing cruelty and depravity of an extreme kind. The verdict and sentences were met with mixed reactions from the public. Many felt that manslaughter charges were insufficient given the brutal nature of the crimes. Others argued that the life sentences appropriately reflected the severity of the acts, regardless of the specific charges. The case led to several changes in Hong Kong's legal system, particularly regarding the handling of cases involving dismemberment and disposal of bodies. It also sparked discussions about drug enforcement, youth protection, and the treatment of vulnerable women in society. For many Hong Kong residents, the Hello Kitty murder became a symbol of the dark undercurrents running beneath the city's gleaming surface. The contrast between the cute, innocent Hello Kitty doll and its grotesque contents seemed to perfectly encapsulate the case's horror. The Hello Kitty murder case left an indelible mark on Hong Kong's collective psyche. It became more than just a crime. It was a cultural touchstone, a cautionary tale, and a source of urban legends. The apartment building on Granville Road became an unofficial dark tourism site, despite attempts by the owners to discourage visitors. Various films, books, and documentaries were produced about the case, each attempting to understand how such brutality could exist in modern society. Fan Man-yee's story also sparked discussions about social issues in Hong Kong. Questions were raised about the protection of vulnerable women, particularly those involved in the nightlife industry. The role of drugs in facilitating violent crime came under increased scrutiny. The presence of a 14-year-old girl in the case led to debates about youth protection and exploitation. For the police officers and others involved in the case, the psychological impact was lasting. Officer Chen Wei-ming, who made the initial discovery, later spoke about how the case changed his perspective on human nature. The forensics team members who processed the crime scene required counseling to deal with what they had witnessed. The three convicted men remained in prison, their appeals denied. Chan Man-lok showed no remorse, maintaining his version of events even years later. Loon Xing-cho and Loon Wai-lun eventually expressed some regret for their actions, though whether this represented genuine remorse or merely resignation to their fate remained unclear. The impact of the Hello Kitty murder case extended far beyond the immediate participants. It affected how Hong Kong society viewed itself and raised uncomfortable questions about the dark possibilities lurking within seemingly ordinary people. The case became a reference point in discussions about violent crime, particularly those involving torture and dismemberment. Criminal psychology students studied it as an example of group dynamics in violent crime, analyzing how three individuals could participate in such extreme acts of cruelty. Case also highlighted the vulnerability of young women in Hong Kong's entertainment industry. Fan Man-yee's path from orphan to nightclub hostess to victim was seen as emblematic of wider systemic issues. Social workers pointed to the case as evidence of the need for better protection and support systems for at-risk youth. The involvement of Ah Fong, the teenage witness, sparked particular concern. How had a 14-year-old girl become involved with a 34-year-old drug dealer? What gaps in the social safety net had allowed this to happen? Her story led to increased scrutiny of youth protection measures and the exploitation of minors in Hong Kong's underground economy. The Hello Kitty doll itself became a symbol of innocence corrupted. Sales of Hello Kitty merchandise temporarily declined in Hong Kong following the case, though they eventually recovered. The incident added a dark chapter to the character's cultural history, creating an unintended association that persists in Hong Kong's collective memory. The case also shed light on Hong Kong's underground world of drugs, prostitution, and organized crime. The apartment where the crimes took place was not in some remote location but in the heart of Sin Shat Sui, one of Hong Kong's busiest districts. This proximity of darkness to everyday life disturbed many residents. The drug trade that had brought the perpetrators and victim together continued to thrive in Hong Kong's shadowy corners. Chan Man-lok's operation was just one small part of a larger network that exploited vulnerable people and created the conditions for violence. The nightclub industry where Fan had worked also came under increased scrutiny. These establishments often operated in a gray area between legal entertainment and illegal activities. Young women like Fan were particularly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse within this system. The case revealed how easily people could disappear in a city of millions. Fan Man-yee had been held captive and tortured for weeks without anyone reporting her missing. Her absence from the nightclub scene had gone unremarked, highlighting the isolation and vulnerability of many young women in similar situations. The psychological aspects of the case fascinated and disturbed mental health professionals. The behavior of the perpetrators raised questions about group dynamics in violent crime and the nature of evil itself. Psychiatrists who evaluated the three men found different pathologies at work. Chan Man-lok displayed classic psychopathic traits: lack of empathy, superficial charm, and no genuine remorse. Loon Xing-cho showed signs of dependent personality disorder, making him susceptible to influence from stronger personalities. Loon Wai-lun exhibited traits of antisocial personality disorder, likely exacerbated by early drug use. The case became a valuable study in criminal psychology, particularly regarding group-enabled sadism. How had three individuals encouraged and enabled each other's worst impulses? What role had drug use played in breaking down normal moral barriers? The psychological impact on Ah Fong was particularly significant. Following the trial, she received extensive counseling to deal with her trauma. Her case highlighted the long-term effects of exposure to extreme violence, especially on young minds. The Hello Kitty murder quickly entered Hong Kong's popular culture. Multiple books were written about the case, ranging from true crime accounts to psychological analyses. Several films and television documentaries explored different aspects of the story. The case also influenced Hong Kong's entertainment industry. Crime dramas began incorporating elements inspired by the case, though usually toned down for public consumption. The image of the Hello Kitty doll took on new meanings in popular culture, sometimes used as shorthand for hidden darkness beneath innocent surfaces. International media picked up the story, fascinated by the juxtaposition of the cute Hello Kitty character with such brutal crimes. The case became one of Hong Kong's most notorious criminal incidents, alongside the Jara's murderer and the Nine Dragons cinema shooting. Social media and internet culture kept the case alive in public memory. Discussion forums debated various aspects of the crime, sometimes developing alternative theories or connecting it to other cases. The story became part of Hong Kong's dark folklore, passed down to younger generations as a cautionary tale. The case influenced Hong Kong's legal system in several ways. The difficulty in securing murder convictions due to the disposal of the body led to discussions about adjusting the burden of proof in dismemberment cases. Prosecutors and lawmakers began considering new approaches to cases involving group violence. The Hello Kitty murder highlighted how traditional legal frameworks sometimes struggled to address crimes involving multiple perpetrators with different levels of culpability. The treatment of young witnesses like Ah Fong also led to changes. New protocols were developed for handling testimony from traumatized minors, and better support systems were put in place for young witnesses in violent crime cases. The case also influenced how Hong Kong's justice system dealt with evidence in dismemberment cases. The successful prosecution, despite the lack of a complete body, created important legal precedents. In response to the case, various organizations implemented new preventive measures. Women's groups established better support networks for nightclub workers and other vulnerable women. Drug rehabilitation programs expanded their outreach efforts, particularly targeting young people at risk of exploitation. Schools enhanced their monitoring of at-risk students, recognizing that early intervention might prevent situations like Ah Fong's. Social workers developed new protocols for identifying and helping young people who might be involved with criminal elements. The police force also adjusted its approaches. Missing persons reports involving nightclub workers or other vulnerable individuals received higher priority. Officers received additional training in recognizing signs of human trafficking and exploitation. While Fan Man-yee's life ended tragically, her story had lasting impact on others who survived similar circumstances. Several nightclub workers came forward with their own stories of abuse and exploitation, leading to increased support for organizations helping women exit the industry. Ah Fong's life took many turns after the trial. While her identity remained protected, reports indicated she struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse issues in her early adult years. However, with support and counseling, she eventually stabilized and became an advocate for troubled youth. The police officers, lawyers, and others involved in the case also carried its impact through their careers. Many became advocates for legal reform or supporters of victims' rights organizations. The case changed how they viewed their roles in the justice system. 25 years later, the Hello Kitty murder remains relevant to contemporary discussions about violence, exploitation, and justice. The case is still studied in criminology classes and cited in discussions about group violence and criminal psychology. The issues it highlighted, drug abuse, exploitation of vulnerable women, youth protection, remain significant concerns in Hong Kong and globally. The case serves as a reminder of how these problems can intersect with devastating consequences. The apartment building on Granville Road still stands, though few current residents know its history. The Hello Kitty doll, that incongruous symbol of innocence and horror, remains sealed in an evidence locker, a tangible reminder of humanity's capacity for both kindness and cruelty. The case continues to prompt difficult questions about society, justice, and human nature. How do ordinary people become capable of extraordinary evil? What responsibility does society bear for creating conditions where such crimes can occur? How can we better protect the vulnerable among us? The Hello Kitty murder case reverberates through Hong Kong's history as more than just a crime. It became a watershed moment that forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. The case revealed dark currents running beneath the city's gleaming surface and prompted important discussions about social responsibility and human nature. For many, the case serves as a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, that ordinary-looking places can harbor extraordinary horrors, and that society's most vulnerable members require vigilant protection. The contrast between the cute Hello Kitty doll and its grotesque contents remains a powerful metaphor for the darkness that can lurk beneath seemingly innocent surfaces. The case's legacy lives on in changed laws, reformed procedures, and enhanced protections for vulnerable individuals. While these changes cannot undo the tragedy of Fan Man-yee's death, they represent important steps toward preventing similar crimes in the future. Perhaps most importantly, the case reminds us that every victim has a story, every crime has a context, and every tragedy has ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate participants. In understanding these connections, we move closer to creating a society where such crimes become truly unthinkable. The Hello Kitty murder stands as a dark chapter in Hong Kong's history, but also as a catalyst for positive change. It demonstrates how even the most horrific events can lead to improved protections for the vulnerable and a deeper understanding of human nature in all its complexity.